Ladies and gentlemen, this podcast, truly one of the most unusual ever recorded, contains dribble, slang, and frank discussion of subject matter which under no circumstances should be heard by small children, persons with a heart condition, or anyone who is upset easily. If you are such a person, or if you're the parent of a very small child in the room, we urge you to switch off your streaming device now.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Kim, how are you doing?
I'm great.
Awesome.
I'm pretty excited to hear what you got for me today.
Yeah. Well, here we go. You ready? We'll stop the chitter chatter. We won't do the little banter. We'll go just straight into it.
I say so. This is part of our
Summer blast.
Yep.
Camping.
Don't do it.
Horrors. Yeah. There's no need. Not with, modern plumbing. You don't need to go outside.
I like camping. I like getting dirty.
Well, you're stupid.
I do.
All right. Ready?
I am ready. I can't wait.
All right. On June 3rd, 1971, 13-year-old Dwayne Bush was reported missing from his home in Union Mills, Indiana. Police just suspected he was a runaway because lately, Dwayne had been getting a lot of trouble and lots of run-ins with the local police department.
He's at that age, too.
Exactly. 3 months pass when a deer hunter comes across the skeletal remains.
Oh.
Bones had been scattered throughout a patch of wooded area about 5 miles northeast of town. They were able to identify the body through dental charts, and that's when it was discovered that Dwayne Bush had been found. Police had no cause of death or suspects. Dwayne's death would not be solved for 12 years.
That's heartbreaking.
On January 10th, 1983, LaPorte, Indiana, 10 miles northwest of Union Mills, a 15-year-old boy who, court records, he's a minor, so his name is not listed, but we'll call him Joe. About 5 p.m., Joe left the store where he had been playing video games, and he went to head home. To get home, he had to go through a cornfield, which is never
a good idea. Nope.
Children of the corn,
nope.
Hello.
Malachi, no.
As he walked through the field, he noticed that someone was following him.
In a cornfield?
Mm-hmm.
That's nightmare fuel.
And it's January, so there's no corn. I mean, it's just an empty field. Joe then saw the man run past him.
That's so creepy.
Once Joe stepped out of the cornfield, the man grabbed him, pulled a gun, and forced Joe into a wooded area. The man told Joe to sit down, and then he started talking to him, saying he knew who Joe was, knew his name, where he lived, knew who his sister was, her name, and his girlfriend's name. When Joe asked the man how he knew all of that, the man says, "Well, I just do." After sitting there for a little while, the man walked Joe to another part of the woods. There, he tied a wire around Joe's neck. The other end of the wire was around his hand. It didn't state whether it was around the guy's hand or around Joe's hand. So I'm unfamiliar with whose hand it was.
Okay.
The man then took down the boy's pants and performed oral sex on him.
Ugh.
Then the man told Joe he was going to take the wire off his neck, but instead pulled it tighter until Joe passed out. When Joe regained consciousness, the man took the wire off Joe's neck and forced him to go to yet another part of the woods and lay down on his stomach.
Oh.
Joe begged and pleaded with the man not to shoot him, but the man said that if he let him go, then Joe would just run to the police and tell him what happened. And Joe promised, he swore. He's like, "I promise, I won't tell, I won't. The man then hit the boy in the back of the head with the gun numerous times, just clubbed him over the back, and Joe pretended to be unconscious. The man continued hitting him with the gun about 8 or 9 more times. Then he pushed Joe with his foot to see if he moved, and when he didn't, the man ran off.
Oh, good. So Joe was okay?
Joe laid for several minutes to be sure the man had gone, and then he got up. He was bleeding heavily from his head, and he felt dizzy and lightheaded, but he was able to walk home.
Wow.
His mother immediately took him to the hospital. The police were called and a report was filed. Joe said the man had told him that his name was Frank. but Joe had never seen him before.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets to camping.
It's okay. I got you.
On Thursday, June 16th, 1983, at 10 p.m., 14-year-old Darren Reed was leaving a friend's house. He jumped on his bike and started for home. At 6:45 Friday morning, Joe's mother called the police to report that Darren never did make it home. At first, police, of course, thought he was a runaway, so they didn't really do a lot of things for him. But then later that day on Friday, they found his bike not far away from his house. And also by the bike lay pieces of wire, a cigarette lighter, and cigarette butts.
Do they have DNA yet back then? No.
In 83.
No. Okay.
At that point, the LaPorte County Sheriff ordered a massive search of the area. Sunday night, June 19th, after approximately 60 hours of searching, Darren's body was found near a fence by a woman who was mowing her yard a mile away from where the bike was found. So there were no outward indications about what caused Darren's death. So they sent, the police just looking at him, they couldn't tell.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent Darren to the ME, of course, where he looked and he couldn't really see a lot of injuries either. They sent samples to the pathologist to see if maybe it was some kind of weird chemical, maybe, or drugs being very
No,
prevalent.
it's not.
Yeah. Instead of a pathologist, they said a chemical expert was called. So I don't know what that means. So later they sent the body to Chicago and they found out that it was strangulation that was the cause of death, but also he had a fractured skull. Darren had a fractured skull. So a couple days later, June 18th, 2 days after Darren left his friend's house, 2 teen boys, Eric Fuller, who was 18, and Jeff Lopez, who was 15, decided to go camping at Kingsbury Fish and Wildlife Park, which as of today is 7,280 acres.
Wow.
And it's grassland, crop fields, brush, marsh areas, and a 30-acre lake. It's pretty big. And it's located between LaPorte and Union Mills. The boys took a tent, sleeping bags, cooking gear, and an axe. When they didn't return home by 4 p.m. on Sunday, June 19th, the Fullers contacted the police. At 8:45 Sunday morning, June 20th, 2 men were driving on their way to work, and wandering alongside of the road, they see a teen male. He was bleeding heavily from 3 severe cuts to the back of his head, along with other wounds to the face and head. He was rushed to the hospital, and he was identified as Eric Fuller, one of the missing teens. Eric was quickly taken into the OR and then later had officers stationed outside the room as guards. Once Eric was able to speak with police, he was able to tell them everything that happened.
Oh, no.
So after Jeff and Eric set up their tent, they went to get firewood, which makes sense. While they were walking along some railroad tracks looking for dry firewood, the boys saw Frank sitting beside the tracks. He was smoking a marijuana cigarette.
Not that reefer.
Mm-hmm.
That dope.
And he asked the 2 boys if they wanted to share it. The boys accepted his offer, and that's when Frank told him his name was Frank Davis. The 3 talked for a short time about how to grow marijuana, where to grow marijuana. They talked a lot about marijuana. And the boys told Frank where they were camping.
Oh, boys.
So that afternoon, Frank came back to the campsite.
Of course he did.
And he offered Jeff and Eric free motorcycle rides. Eric said that Jeff had briefly bogged Frank's motorcycle down in the mud, but Frank didn't seem to mind. Actually, he was a friendly sort, all smiles.
Mm-hmm.
Frank had brought more marijuana cigarettes, and the 3 sat inside the tent for about a half an hour, just talking, having a good time.
Smoking.
Mm-hmm. And then Frank left on his motorcycle when it started to get dark.
Mm-hmm.
The boys sat around their campfire for a while, and then Jeff went to sleep in the tent, while Eric lay down in his sleeping bag outside the tent. Some campers next to the boys were partying, and they were playing loud music, so Eric really was having a lot of trouble to go to sleep, so he got up and sat at a picnic table for a little bit. Eventually, he did get tired, and so he went back to his sleeping bag outside the tent.
So he's not inside the tent right now?
No, he's outside the tent.
Mm-mm.
So Eric...
I know it's only a little vinyl, but I feel more confident and secure inside the tent, even though
It's a little zipper. And
It's a zipper.
Mhm.
Maybe it's like that little kid thing where you cover your eyes and you think that nobody
Everybody's
can see you.
disappeared.
Yeah.
Eric recalled Frank woke him up and told him that Jeff had been hurt while riding the motorcycle and he needed help. Eric, without thinking, just got up and left. Actually, he went so quickly he forgot to put his glasses on.
Oh.
However, when Frank asked him to pick up the axe, Eric did so. When Frank and Eric got away from the campsite and out by the railroad tracks, Frank pulled out a knife and forced Eric to lie down. Frank then took the axe and tied Eric's hands with wire. Frank then performed oral sex on Eric and then made him roll over on his stomach. Frank then hit Eric on the head with the axe 4 times. But Eric only remembered being hit once before he lost consciousness.
That would hurt so bad.
Next thing he remembers is waking up in the hospital
Badly.
with the wounds in his head. The blows had damaged his peripheral vision, and he suffered seizures and dizziness, headaches, nausea, and nightmares, plus difficulty walking. But he's alive.
Thank goodness.
So then a search of 80 law enforcement officers from LaPorte and surrounding counties were called to look for Jeff Lopez. He still had not been found. This included...
Now, Jeff stayed back at the tent.
Jeff was in the tent while Frank got Eric.
Oh, okay.
Or so it seems.
Oh, see. Yeah, okay.
This huge 80 law enforcement search included airplanes, helicopters, on foot, horseback, dogs, you name it. Everybody was sent out. At 1:55 a.m. on Monday, June 21st, the nearly decapitated body of Jeff Lopez was found by a state patrol and conservation officer 30 feet from the railroad tracks east of where the boys had camped.
So that was the same area that they met him at.
Around the same area.
Walking around, yeah.
The murder weapon was the axe belonging to Jeff Lopez's father. It had been picked up at the campsite at the time of the abduction. Motorcycle tire prints were also found close to Jeff's body. So on Tuesday, June 22nd, an hour after Jeff Lopez's body had been found, police went to the house of 30-year-old Frank R. Davis.
He's only 30?
When police arrived at Frank's house, he was attempting to leave on his motorcycle. Police arrested Frank and charged him with criminal deviant sexual conduct. And with the newspaper, they were like, at this time, we just want to say that he is only charged with sexual misconduct. He's not charged in any of the murders. I mean, it was like a big deal. Frank R. Davis was born on January 29th, 1953, to Ronald and Darlene Davis in LaPorte, Indiana. He only has one other sibling, a sister. And Frank had been in trouble with the law since he was about 13 years old. He was first sent to a state reformatory in Pendleton, Indiana on November of 1971. He was serving a 1 to 10 year sentence for second-degree burglary, where I believe he only got away with $40. He was released after a year and put on parole. In August of 1974, he was arrested for violating his parole. He robbed somebody, and he was sentenced to 1 to 10 years again. This time, Davis escaped from the reformatory on January 3rd, 1974. And while on the lam, he was convicted of armed robbery and put into Randolph County Jail, where he also escaped. He was finally captured on March 6, 1976, where then he began serving a 19-year sentence for the armed robbery plus an extra 366 days for his jail bust. On September 1982, he was released from the Pendleton facility, and after his release, Frank headed down to Florida to work as an electrician. He had just moved back to the LaPorte area on May 31st, 1983. And because of his past record, the police were trying to keep an eye on him. And actually, because of the things found around Darren's body when it was found, someone actually brought up Frank's name. Thinking,
the things, meaning the wire and stuff?
The wires, the cigarette. And there's not a lot of information on this, so a lot of it I had to get from newspapers. And newspapers wouldn't go
they don't
too deeply into it. So shortly after being brought into the police station, Frank admitted to the murders of Darren Reed and Jeff Lopez. He also admitted to killing Dwayne Bush in 1971 and sexually assaulting Eric Fuller and the 13-year-old boy Joe in January of 83.
So how old was he when he killed the kid in 71?
18.
Wow.
He was 18. This is Frank's confession about what happened with Darren. Darren and another boy were visiting Frank's niece when Frank first saw Darren. They were out riding go-karts and most of the day, and Frank was giving the kids rides on his motorcycle. Later, Frank had asked Darren if he wanted to go out that evening and, maybe see if they can score some marijuana, how to get it. Two of his tricks, marijuana and motorcycles.
The marijuana is a gateway drug. See what happens when you do it? See what happens, boys and girls, when you do drugs?
You know what? I think motorcycles and this could be gateway drug too.
So could mustaches, but that's a whole nother story.
So about 10 o'clock p.m., Darren was leaving his friend's house, like was stated, and Frank hid and waited for Darren by some railroad tracks. He heard Darren walk by that location, and Frank called out to him. Darren stopped, and Frank offered Darren a beer, which Frank accepted, and they sat and drank for a bit. A few minutes later, Darren said it was getting late and he had to go home. Frank then threatened Darren with a knife and tied a wire around his neck and hands. Then he took Darren into some weeds beside the tracks. That's where Frank performed oral sex on Darren and then choked him to death using his bare hands.
Ugh.
After Darren was dead, Frank carried Darren's body across a fence and left the body in some weeds, where the woman that was mowing her lawn later found him. Here's what happened. We already know what happened to Eric Fuller.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is what Frank said happened to Jeff. Frank said he had watched and waited until the two boys went to sleep. At 3 a.m., Frank went into the tent and woke up Jeff and forced him into the woods at knife point. There, Frank tied Jeff up with the wire, performed oral sex on him, sodomized him, strangled him with a wire, and then slit his throat to where he almost decapitated him. He confessed that he did the same thing to Eric, but he did Eric after he did Jeff. So he was then arrested for murder at a police lineup. The 15-year-old Joe identified Frank as his attacker also. Frank was charged with 6 counts of felony murder, which I really don't understand that since he only admitted to killing 3 people, but I don't know.
Was there some other ones in there somewhere?
Not that I found. So he was charged with 6 counts of felony murder and charges of child molestation and sexual deviant conduct. And the DA was going to go for the death penalty.
Good.
At first, Frank pleaded innocent by reason of insanity. So the judge ordered 4 psychiatric doctors to interview Frank. And there, they all 4 found them competent. And the trial, he was belligerent and, they'd say something. And he's like, you don't know. I mean, he just actually, the judge was going to have him arrested for contempt of court because of so many outbursts. Then he changed his plea. He changed his plea to innocent. So that went to trial.
See,
Jury selection lasted 3 days, and this trial started on January 12th. By January 13th, at 11 o'clock in the morning, the court took a recess, and by the time the court was called back into session, Frank had changed his plea again.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he escaped because he liked to escape.
No, he changed his plea to guilty because he accepted a plea bargain.
Oh.
The new charge was if he pled guilty, he would be only charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. All the sexual misconduct and child molestation was out the window, but the DA could still go for the death penalty.
Which I hope they did.
At the sentencing hearing, Frank's lawyer stated that Frank had been a victim of the system. When Frank was younger and in a state hospital facility, he was molested in the same way he molested his victims. The judge said, while the court finds that insightful into why Frank has done what he did, it is no excuse for his actions.
Yep. See you, buddy.
Bye-bye. Also, during the hearing process, it was a 2-day hearing process, people had gone into Frank's cell to kind of clean it out, I guess, when he was gone, and they found a suicide note in his jail cell. And there was never any mention on how he planned to kill himself or when he was going to kill himself. The newspapers never stated it was kept on the DL.
Yeah.
Nobody, it just was mentioned.
Making fun of him.
So on January 25th, 1984, the judge sentenced Frank R. Davis to death by electric chair. Now, Frank said he wasn't going to appeal it.
But I bet he did.
Well, here's the deal. Frank wasn't going to appeal it. The judge set Frank's execution date for May 7th. Well, I guess in Indiana, Death sentences have to be appealed by the state Supreme Court. And they also said, yeah, go for it. Have a good time. So the next part doesn't really make any sense to me because you would think that it was a short time and Frank didn't appeal. But 9 years later, in November of 93, Frank Davis files a joint motion for equitable relief, which vacates the death sentence, which basically means that what good is it to kill me? It's not going to bring the boys back kind of thing.
Please.
Or that's what I understood it to be.
Yeah, I got you.
This would leave him with this 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder.
Mhm.
So December 8th of 1993, following a new sentencing hearing, Davis was resentenced to consecutive terms of 60 years for each murder and 50 years for each attempted murder. A total sentence of 220 years imprisonment. Frank R. Davis died of metastatic lung cancer on January 22nd, 2008, 7 days before his 55th birthday.
I bet that hurt.
He was cremated.
You know what else hurt? He did to those boys.
Those little boys. He
I
deserves
hope it really hurt.
awful. Just awful.
So the one that he was, was the other one outside sleeping in the tent when he snuck in at 3 o'clock and got that
Eric
one
was
first?
outside on the tent and Jeff was inside the tent.
And he got Jeff
And
first.
he got Jeff first.
That's
so he
weird.
probably liked Jeff. And so when he came back later for Eric, I mean, Jeff was already gone. So if Eric would have looked for
Jeff. in the
Jeff,
tent.
he would have been gone.
Yeah.
But then you're thinking, okay, it's in the morning. He's discombobulated.
Yeah,
and
but if some guy is coming at 3 o'clock in the morning and telling me you're gone, I'd be like, what are you doing here?
Right. Well, he's like, Jeff had a motorcycle accident. Come.
But why would Jeff be on the motorcycle
Right.
in the middle of the night? You know what I
Exactly.
mean?
But you're 16. You're half asleep.
Yeah, I guess.
You're not going to
Yeah, I guess.
You're not going to think like that. So that's the end of this episode of our True Crime Podcast, Summer Blast, Camping Nightmares, or whatever we're going to call it. We don't know yet.
It's okay. I like that one.
Because, hey, it's an OTPC. OTCP? Yeah. We don't know what we're doing.
It's
and-
down with OTCP.
And if you want to know a secret, you know as soon as we know what we're doing. Because that's how we're prepared.
That's true. That is true.
We're not think ahead kind of
Truth.
girls. We're really not.
No, in theory, though, we think ahead and we have good ideas, and then somehow they fall apart as we are trying to make it happen.
Yeah. Whatever. It happens.
It's okay.
We've gotten this far.
We did 4 episodes today. I'd say
We
that's
did.
pretty darn
I'm
good.
pretty excited about that. Yeah.
That could be a second close to a record.
Yep. We got more to do.
That's right, buddy.
And another day, though. All right. You want to take us out?
I will. You can find us on Twitter at Our True Crime Pod.
Mm-hmm.
We have a Facebook, Our True Crime Podcast page and fan page, I guess like a discussion page. We have an Etsy store where you can buy a lovely Our True Crime Podcast t-shirt and tank for those you love. Wink,
Or
wink.
for yourself.
Or for yourself. We have a Patreon. If we're getting a little slow on that because it's just kind of our speed, but promise we're going to take care of you. We're putting the little goodie bags together for you all today.
Mm-hmm.
And you will get little presents in the mail because Jen and I both love to get mail presents. Wait.
It's our favorite.
I love to get mail presents.
We love mail presents.
Presents in the mail is what I meant.
Yeah.
So it's like,
That's not as fun as mail
Yeah, that's
presents,
true.
but whatever.
we'll
take what we can get.
That's true. That is true. That is true. And so you can check us out there. We're going to upload, we should have already uploaded a early premiere episode for them to go first, but then we're working on our other ones that are coming up. And I think that's about it.
I think that's it. Whereas these have been recorded earlier and playing while we are in rehab from Crime Con. And hopefully you followed along on Instagram, and hopefully we remembered to put stuff on Instagram.
Maybe.
I don't know. It's right now it's a crapshoot. So,
You just never know.
Hey,
mate, I'm just saying that we're getting this out today.
road to hell is full of good intentions.
Right, buddy.
And that's what we're
And you know what
counting
that road to hell is all about? It's all about the journey, not the destination.
on.
And thank God we got some beer and some
Hey,
party
Journey was
people.
my very first album I ever bought.
Okay, good.
All right.
Glad. All right. Remember, lock your doors.
And keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. when it was discovered. Or hold on.
That he was impotent.
Yeah, he was impotent.
I'm an impotent person.
I'm impotent.
Not funny. Sorry.
They were able to identify who the victim was from the dental chart.
You want me to make fun of you now?
Yeah, exactly. I'm making fun of myself.
Oh, Lord. He was able to be identified from the dental.
Yes. When police...
When the popo arrived at the
Okay,
scene.
now you just blew out his
Sorry,
ears.
Nico. I did it on purpose.
Mm-hmm. Jeff and Eric, free motorcycle rides. You were going to say mustache rides. You were thinking that, weren't you? It wasn't. It's free motorcycle rides.
Oh.
Eric said that Jeff had briefly bogged the motorcycle down in the mud.
Okay.